which is, if you know anything about the Tri-Cities, it's Kennewick and Richland. Then I worked for the city of Richland, but then I crossed the river and went over to Port of Pasco. And sort of my introduction, I guess, into DEI was looking at Pasco and Franklin County is a Hispanic majority. Over 50% of the population. I think it was about 52, 53% via census, but we kind of figure it's closer to 58, 60% by actual count, since the Hispanic population is historically undercounted in the census. And so as I was trying to do my job on economic development, I became clear that the future of Pasco and the future of Franklin County was tied strongly into the future and success of the Hispanic community and their ability to create wealth, become talented, find jobs, create businesses, do all these things. And so that's when I joined the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. I ended up on the board for the Hispanic Chamber. I'm sorry, I was thinking. So it's kind of because obviously I'm Anglo. I'm like really Anglo, and I don't speak Spanish. And yet I found myself on the board, and oftentimes other groups who were looking to try to get diversity would invite a member of the Hispanic Chamber Board to come to their organizations. And the look of disappointment in their eyes when they realized that I was the representative of the Hispanic Chamber, they're like, well, that's technically you fit, but you're not exactly what we were looking for. So that was a great group and a great organization to work with, and I really enjoyed my time in Pasco and with the Port of Pasco. And that was one of the things we tried to do, is make sure is identify ways to make sure like that opportunities were getting out to populations that didn't necessarily receive them. That's certainly in the past year has become important across the nation. It's been important for a long time, but I think has been heightened attention to it. And that's certainly true in the economic development community. And so as you look at economic development and bringing in and trying to create jobs and everything else, I don't know that we necessarily had that focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think there's a lot of efforts underway to say, if we're growing the economy, can we do it in such a way that we address some of these disparities, racial, cultural, and otherwise, and equal it. And we, another great quote, again, which is not mine, was, you talk about a rising tide raises all boats, but some people don't have a boat. So we have to make sure that we're getting the skills and talents out to people. And lastly, I think on economic development, everything is coming down to talent. Economic development used to be a lot about incentives, and that's still an important part. But as we look at bringing new companies in and growing existing companies, the access to talent has become critical. And I mean, we saw this before COVID, right? That we saw unemployment rates dropping. We saw employment participation rates increasing, even though they had dropped to historic lows. So that ability for companies to find the talent they need, and for businesses to find the talent they need, is becoming more and more important. And so we can't, philosophically, as economic developers, not try to find talent wherever we can in our own communities. And if we're passing people by simply because of historical or racial factors or whatever it may be, then shame on us, really. And so that's, I think, efforts that you'll see broader in the economic development community. We'll be working on an update to what's referred to as the CEDS, or Comprehensive Economic Development Strategy, I expect DEI to be an important element in that discussion, and I don't want, it's a community-wide discussion, so I don't want to, force or say this is what it will look like, but that will be an important piece to it. So I guess I'd open it to like questions, or if folks have them, or.
Yeah, do we have any questions for Gary?
Ben does.
Yeah, Gary, I'm just wondering if there were any special or specific programs that you saw to be effective in the Tri-Cities with bridging that gap in Pasco and Richland, Kennewick, and were there specific programs that were getting that were developing talent and you saw inroads? I know I believe it's Delta High School.
Mm-hmm.
I know that was a STEM high school that was developed, and it actually is in Pasco, I believe, to move into the engineering fields. Do you know of any other options that folks were doing?
Sure. So Delta is, I think, a great example. One of the things that I felt, so Delta was a shared resource between 3 school districts. So it started in Richland and moved over to Pasco, but that would just be the school district it's housed in, that took students from across the Tri-Cities, similar to our Tri-Tech, which is the tech center. But to get into Delta, you would self-select, and then it was a lottery system. And so students, regardless of grade level, could get into Delta and get into that program. And so you saw a diversity in Delta that reflected the diversity of the community, versus, I think, if it was strictly on a grades based, or I think it would have been difficult. I think one of the was, so predominantly when you look at the Tri-Cities, the major minority is Hispanic. And if you look at the population of that community, most of it has roots in Mexico, something like 85%. And of those 85% with roots in Mexico, another 85% were out of 3, like Jalisco and Michoacan. So one of the important things was making sure that we had students, like walk-up days, where students would be able to go and see people that look like them having different careers, so that they could see themselves in those careers. I know both Columbia Basin College and WSU Tri-Cities also, had a lot of student liaisons that were out reaching out in the high schools and actually going. So people, because both of those schools had a lot of first-time kids, first generation, going to college, and so the ability to see somebody like them was really important, I think. So I believe those programs were really useful in doing that. And I don't want to, hold up any community that says, boy, they have all the answers, right? I think this is another quote that is not mine, is diversity is a journey, not a destination, right? It's something that we continue to work on.
Thank you. Any other questions for Gary?
Hi, Gary. I just have a quick question.
Sure.
I'm curious, is GSI involved with Ohana here locally? And have you gotten to know Ohana? Because they're a great
Yes.
group.
So there is a relationship. I haven't had a chance to meet with Ohana yet. Working on that. One of the meetings, obviously, as we rolled into the shutdown, because I've primarily been going out and meeting with folks on site. So we're looking to do that. And then GSI is also part of IDN. And I'm looking at Cassie on my screen to make sure I get my acronyms right, because there's a lot of acronyms. And part of that work is using elements of economic development to make sure that disparate communities are being able to pursue that economic growth. And so as part of that effort, I think we'll see that. But AHANA and a couple of the other organizations around here are also trying to remember the terminology that Department of Commerce uses. So they are specifically contracted with Department of Commerce to help in outreach to, as part of the CARES funding and things like that, outreach to disadvantaged businesses that may need additional services in filling out the forms. So we're kind of interacting that way, as well as I think some of the marketing program dollars. So there is, I think there's a number of ties between GSI and groups like AHANA itself and groups like AHANA. I haven't had a chance to do that yet, but again, I think through this CEDS process, we'll get a chance for more outreach and interaction.
Great, thanks.
Thank you. I think if there's other questions, Gary, maybe we can hold those to the end of the meeting so that we can keep on our agenda, but thank you. Thank you very much.
Welcome. Thanks.
All right, next up, Mark and Mike, Spokane Workforce Council. Right on it. Thank you. Go ahead.
Oh, I don't think we can hear you, Mark. Okay, I know Mark had said that he was having some audio difficulties, and so I'll just take it from there. So Mark is our CEO, and I'm the business industry analyst for the Spokane Workforce Council, and just wanted to kind of set the table for some recent economic and labor force data to kind of generate any questions or discussion and all that. So I'll run through some of what's new and what we're seeing going forward, but please jump in at any point if anything sparks a question or you want to get any clarification. But I'll jump right into the latest data in terms of unemployment numbers is from October. And I'll preface this by saying this will probably be the best month in terms of data that we'll see for the whole winter. But we're looking at a labor force in Spokane County of about 258,000 with 242,000 employed, which leaves about 15,515 unemployed with a 6% unemployment rate. So that's actually pretty low compared to earlier this year. April was 16.7%, which was the all-time high that we've ever seen in Spokane County. And of course, this time period kind of captures right before the new economic restrictions went into effect, which will drive some numbers up a bit. But you can see that the Puget Sound region actually really low. It's just some of the rural counties are the higher unemployment rates around the state. And then just for reference of what this past year looked like in comparison to the past recession before the Great Recession, we obviously just spiked to a really high level immediately and then have been coming down pretty fast. Whereas on the far left, you can see that gray shaded area was the Great Recession, which was kind of a long lasting incline in unemployment rate and then a long recovery. So this is more of an immediate shock and more of an immediately coming back, but we are obviously not out of the woods yet when it comes to the recession that we're currently in. So one of the ways we track the unemployment levels is initial claims for unemployment insurance. So these are people who are applying for unemployment for the first time. It could be they've applied for it before, but the week that it's being counted, they're applying for it to start a new claim. So we saw almost 9,000 in 1 week early on in the pandemic, and then it's kind of come down over time, and we're seeing pretty low levels for the last couple months, only to see it spike back up for the last 2 weeks. That's obviously in relation to the new economic restrictions that went into place. They affected some of it affected some of the specific industries and occupations that we saw. So in terms of continued claims, this is more of a better gauge of how many are currently and actively unemployed. And there's a couple different types of unemployment that we look at. The regular continued claims are the standard unemployment that is just a normal state unemployment claim. Pandemic unemployment assistance and pandemic emergency unemployment compensation were both part of the CARES Act and expanded who can be on unemployment. The PUA claims are kind of the 1099, the contract workers and part-time workers. So these are people who are typically not available to apply for unemployment, and it's been expanded to that group for the first time. And then pandemic emergency unemployment is the length of time that someone could be on unemployment. So they've exhausted a full regular continued claim. And I think I'm having some audio issues. Perhaps let me see if I can change my microphone that I'm using. I apologize for that.
I think it's good right now, Mike. It was just a few minutes ago. It was a little bit
Okay,
garbled.
it's cutting in and
Yeah.
out. Is this okay right here? I changed the
Yeah.
microphone that's picking up from.
I can hear you.
Okay, great.
I think it just keeps going higher and lower, Mike. We can hear you most of the time, but I think the speaker
Okay.
moves closer and away.
Well, I apologize. I changed the microphone. Now it's coming from the webcam. So hopefully that picks up more consistently. So the pandemic unemployment or the pandemic emergency unemployment are the length of time that someone could be on unemployment. And they've exhausted the amount of time that they can be on a regular continued claim. So it's typically those folks fall into a long-term unemployed. And those are really the ones that have a hard time getting back to work typically, because the longer you stay out of work, oftentimes your skills and abilities can atrophy in a way. And it's just, there's a lot of compounding issues that make it harder to get reemployed. So we really look at those closely. And then both of those programs were part of the CARES Act. And unless Congress acts, which hopefully they do, they're both expected or are both scheduled to expire on December 26th. So we definitely are hoping for some action to either extend the length or make some changes to help people out, because that's a significant amount of people who would be affected by it just drying up. So this is kind of over time what the regular continued claims, the PUA and PEUC claims have looked like. You can see regular continued claims have come up a little bit in the last couple of weeks. But what we really wanted to do today was kind of show who are the unemployed in terms of a few different demographic groupings and such. So in terms of the occupation groups of the different unemployment claims types, food prep and serving is number one in all three groups. That makes a lot of sense because that's by far the most impacted industry by the pandemic restrictions are put in place. Regular claims actually saw construction and extraction go up pretty handily lately. That's more to do with seasonality. Typically construction slows down in Spokane over the winter and we see that expand in unemployment. But management and office admin support are also well represented in different types of claims. But in the PUA claims, we actually see personal care and service, which shows up almost 11% of all the claims are in that category. And that doesn't exist in the other categories in such a large amount. which is a little interesting. And then sales and related and management. So these are kind of the groupings that the occupation groupings that the unemployment claims are coming from currently. And then when we look at the genders, it changes a bit depending on what unemployment group. So regular continued claims are majority male. And as I said, construction has started to hit those claims lately, so it's skewed it more male than it was a couple of weeks ago. But the PUA continued claims are majority female, which is of interest and of note, as those are the, as I said earlier, the 1099, the gig workers and part-time workers who are applying for unemployment. So there could be a number of different factors which are causing it to be almost an inverse of the regular continued claims in terms of gender. And then the PEUC continued claims, those who are long-term unemployed, it's getting a little bit closer to 50-50, but still a little bit more male. And then in terms of educational attainment rate of those who are applying for unemployment by type, honestly, it's kind of similar across all cases, but those with higher levels of education are just less impacted by the unemployment currently. But we're seeing a significant amount that are in the high school education or less categories. 42% of regular continued claims are in that. Add on another 27% of those with some college. So those with an associate's degree or higher is only about a third of the regular continued claims. So educational attainment is a major factor in terms of who's on unemployment. And that makes sense with the types of jobs and industries that are most heavily impacted. But unfortunately, this does have a way of kind of expanding inequality in a lot of ways, of those who have higher levels of education are the least impacted by the downturn. And that can have a real dramatic effect on economic well-being of folks.
Mike, a quick
Yes.
question related to that. Are those numbers similar to the overall population, adult population in Spokane County, at least the employable adult population?
They are not. We have a bit higher education level than what's shown here. So it's definitely skewed towards those who have lower levels of education.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
And then by age group, this is kind of interesting and has actually changed a bit over time. When the pandemic initially hit, we saw those in the lower age groups immediately impacted, and it's slowly come down a little bit. But the 25 to 34-year-old group is the largest group within the workforce, so it makes sense that they're the most heavily impacted, but the variations are of interest, especially with how the PUA continued claims, the 1099 gig workers, it skews to kind of both ends in terms of compared to the proportion within the labor force, that the under 24 is a little higher than is representative in the under 24 in the overall labor force, and then also the 65 and older. So those two groupings are kind of in the 1099 gig economy a little bit more than perhaps we even knew. But the other ones are fairly even across the different age groups, but it's definitely impacting the lower ages more. And then for folks in the 25 to 34 and 35 to 44 age group, obviously this is two once-in-a-lifetime recessions hitting in the first 10 years of a working life. So that fundamentally affects your earning potential for your entire career. And then for racial demographics, in terms of the claims, there's one issue that affects kind of the proportions, is the way that the demographics data is collected is not exactly the same way that the census collects data. So typically Latino, Hispanic is considered an ethnicity and not a race, but it's put into a race category for the claim. So it does skew things a little bit, but we are seeing that racial minorities, except Asian, are proportionally even or overrepresented in terms of unemployment as compared to the representation in the labor force. So minorities are being impacted larger in terms of the jobs that are being put into unemployment than their proportion in the overall labor force. And depending on how unknown gets applied, it would affect things more than others. They're not extremely far off in a lot of cases from the proportions we see in the overall labor force, but it is there is some effect there. And then a few things that we wanted to touch on as well is just the need for food assistance has skyrocketed this year. We're seeing about 10,000 more people applying for or who are receiving basic food assistance this time versus this time last year. And it's about 90,500 residents were receiving SNAP basic food assistance in September, which is roughly 18% of Spokane County's overall population. So that's pretty wild that almost 1/5 of Spokane County is on basic food assistance right now. And then another factor that comes into play, this data is actually updated recently, and the cost of living index for Spokane County has now surpassed the overall average of the United States. So the 102.2 cost of living index for Spokane County, that's compared to the overall cost of living across the US, which would be 100. So it's more expensive to live in Spokane County than the US on average. However, our average annual salary is $8,000 less than the US on average. So you can see how the cost of living has gone up, but our wages have not commiserately gone up. So even when you look at Seattle area, which always gets called so expensive because it is, their purchasing power is actually significantly higher than Spokane's because the average wages in the West Side are higher as a proportion. So that's another factor that is affecting Spokane in a lot of ways, and why we're perhaps seeing poverty rates stay excessively high and the food assistant need being so high right now. So we wanted to end on some good news in a sense is that job postings, even though we're seeing unemployment be high, job postings have actually gone up in the last couple months. Last month was the highest we've seen all year, and then October was the highest we've seen all year. November was down a little bit, but still above 5,000 was the third highest month so far this year. So obviously early on in the pandemic, like in April, May, it was very, very low month over month, and then we've seen it come up. So the industries that are posting, healthcare and social assistance was by far number one. Then retail trade, we actually saw a lot of postings for that in November. There's a lot of churn in that industry, so they're usually pretty high just in general. Then transportation, warehousing, finance, insurance, and manufacturing were the top 5 industries for job postings in November. So that's interesting in a lot of ways, because especially with transportation and warehousing being so high, there's a bit of a transition in the economy towards warehousing becoming more and more important. Obviously, with the way people are purchasing goods now over the internet, warehousing has become very important. And with Amazon locating in Spokane, we've obviously seen a lot of action there. And interestingly of note, 4 of the 5 industries here, except retail, are 4 of our 5 targeted industries as far as the Workforce Development Council goes, and where we put most of our funding and effort towards retraining go towards 4 of these 5 industries for the most part. And then in terms of the occupations that were posted for November, registered nurse is #1 every single month. It doesn't matter, pandemic, no pandemic. But then labor, warehouse worker, physician, truck driver, dental assistant. So these are a lot of these are ones we see often, but the warehouse worker, truck driver, we're seeing, like I said, on the last slide, we're seeing a lot of the warehousey type jobs pop a lot lately, as well as healthcare is always #1. But healthcare is so massive in Spokane County, it's almost 1 in every 5 jobs. So the size is large no matter what. And then lastly, I wanted to kind of do our projections. The projections based on occupations that require a certain level of education. So overall, Spokane County is expected to grow over time about 0.7% annually, new job growth. The pandemic will obviously affect that for this next year, but this is more for the long term. And then we're seeing postgraduate degree jobs are growing almost double that rate. However, the amount of those jobs are not as large in Spokane County as others, but we're seeing bachelor's and also the 2-year associate's degree both growing faster than the Spokane County overall growth rate. So the jobs that require less than that in terms of education are all growing slower than projected to grow slower than the overall Spokane jobs growth rate. So it's of interest that jobs that require more education are the ones that are growing. So that plays right into obviously what we're seeing with the unemployment as well, of the jobs that are being most heavily affected are the ones with the lower educational requirements as well. So it's just of note that the more education that folks have generally, the more job opportunity there will be, and also the less likely those jobs are to be majorly affected by recessions and such.
Hey, Mike, really quick question on this slide.
Yes.
On the all levels, the parentheses number, I'm assuming that's the average salary, the 53.
Yes. Yeah, that is correct. So each occupation grouping by education, that's the average salary of that grouping.
And then a slide or two before, it had Spokane County salary as like 50,300 something, I think it was. I was just curious what the discrepancy or the difference.
Yeah, so if you base it on industry versus based on occupation group, there's a bit of a difference. It's just the way that it's calculated through our analytics software. So unfortunately, it's not spot on because there is some difference in terms of because there's about 10 to 15% of all jobs don't get counted in the way that Employment Security Department collects the data of a covered employment. So there takes some analytics. I know I'm probably going too far in the weeds here. It takes some analytics to make adjustments, and it's affected by if it's counting at the industry or occupation level. So that's the difference. Sorry.
Thank you. No, that's fine. I just didn't know that. Thank you.
Yep. Yeah, and then so that was the last slide I had, and here's our emails for both Mark and I. If you ever have data specific needs, please send me an email anytime, and I can send this slide deck to Cassidy or anyone to send it out to the whole group. But we're also more than happy to take any questions now.
Hey, Mike, it's Mark here from the Spokane Public Library.
Hello.
Hello. Hey, do the data sources that you pull from, do you guys have access to more the 1099 and independent contractor type of workers around town? Because the tools that I have, I can pull from, if a business has a presence with, say, the Secretary of State, then we've got a pretty good handle on them that way. But the 1099s are a blank slate for me. And so do you get that data in aggregate, or can you break it down by here are all the 1099 employees in the landscaping industry? What does that look like for you guys?
Yeah, so that has been really a sticky wicket for forever, really, because as you said, if they're not covered employment, they don't get calculated into government data sources, which is oftentimes utilized for making the employment and labor statistics. So we do utilize JobsEQ from Chmura, which uses some analytics to estimate kind of which occupation groups or industries have more of those 1099 workers and kind of add them in. So you can look for the difference between, say, Employment Security Department's produced numbers versus the JobsEQ numbers, but it's really not a robust amount as I'm sure you're looking for. And really having the pandemic unemployment assistance is one of our first real looks into people who are on the 1099 or contract work employment situation. We're really, for the first time, getting a pretty good look based on what occupations and industries they're coming out of. And unfortunately, it's because they're applying for unemployment insurance, but it's the first real time that we've gotten that level of granularity to the data.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Cool. Okay. I resolved my issue. Sorry for the delay. And I'll speak that to Mark regarding the pandemic unemployment assistance. We are also working to get a data sharing agreement with the state so we can look at exactly who those people are that are those 1099 contract and part-time workers to better understand who they are and where they're coming from. Because as I think we mentioned that on the day after Christmas, those benefits are ending for over 5,000 people in Spokane County, and that's going to impact a ton of people that have no income support unless Congress passes something in the days to come. But even if they do pass something, those benefits will expire at some point. So we're working to get a much better ability to actually know exactly who they are, what jobs they came from, what industries they came from, and then help them connect to their next opportunity through training or through just getting the next best job they can get. So we're very hopeful in the next week or two, we're going to have that agreement inked with the state, and we'll be able to get a better detail on who those people are. And as Mike said, like for the first time. So it's kind of exciting that this has given us the opportunity to really peer into parts of the economy that there hasn't been a lot of visibility on. And it's those people that are being really impacted by this. And, a lot of folks that are coming out of, that are living, working poor, living in poverty, that have different characteristics, demographic characteristics that we're really trying to work hard to reach. So we should have more information on that in the next couple of weeks and be happy to share that. Hi, Meg.
Hi, Mark. I have a quick question, and I should have asked it just a minute ago, and I apologize, but that growth rate for post-grad degrees and bachelor's degrees, do you think that's health sciences? Where is that growth rate expected?
Yep, yeah, that's a lot of healthcare employment is the ones that require the postgraduate. That's the majority of the employment of that category, and that's where all the growth is coming from. Just because healthcare is continuing to be one of the main drivers in Spokane County for the economic growth.
And do you think we're seeing any of that in professional, the professional sector, the business sector? Engineering. Yeah. I'm thinking about McKinstry's, the new building and the highway expansion.
Professional, scientific, and technical services, kind of that overreaching category. It's fairly broad. It's really not that large in Spokane in terms of total employment, but in terms of new job growth, it's definitely percentage-wise growing faster than the average.
Awesome. Thank you. It's always so helpful, Mike. Appreciate it.
I think a lot of those jobs are very transportable in those fields. And so I think we're seeing some influx of people from other regions that want to live in Spokane, want to buy in Spokane, but they can work remotely. We're seeing that at GeoEngineers to some extent. Any other questions for Mike and Mark? Well, thank you both. Certainly appreciate it. Some other questions might come up as we move along, but we're going to turn to our higher education partners. During the last meeting, we asked some of our business partners how they are faring with the pandemic, but also what are the opportunities with this group, which is an action-oriented group. So we've asked our higher ed partners to speak to a couple things. First of all, just provide us a interesting tidbit about yourself that we don't know, but also can you share some of your thoughts about the business and education collaboration? What can we do with this group to support higher education? And I've asked each of you to speak for a couple minutes, 2 to 3 minutes. I've also asked to pick one other question out of a pool, just to respond to. One, how has COVID affected your ability to provide a great opportunity for your students? 2, what do you see as promising areas or opportunities for your institution and the higher education arena in general? 3, how is your institution supporting diversity, inclusion, and equity and inclusion? And 4th, how are your students coping with those educational challenges that we're facing right now? So maybe just one of those 4 questions in addition to the 2 base questions. And I think just to keep it easy for me to track, we will go alphabetically by last names. Jeannie, then Catherine, then Sherry, then Yoli, Margaret, Kimberly, and Gregor. Is Gregor on? I don't see him. So Jeannie, why don't you start off for us, please?
Terrific. And apologies, I don't have my computer working all that well right now. And so I may not answer all of the questions as you've posed them. So bear with me. I'm Jeannie Belcher. I'm Regional Manager for Western Governors University, based here with Western Governors University, Washington campus. Most of you don't know me. I'm really delighted that I do know some of you, which is always great. I'm based on the West Side, although I spend time all around the state, and I love coming to the East Side of the state. My heart feels happy. My blood pressure goes down as soon as I hit the top of Snoqualmie Pass and head the other way. So I don't know what that says about me, but I envy a lot of you who get those sunny days and sun and snow and hot and all that good stuff. So you may have to walk me through some of those questions again, but the one thing that Western Governors University is an online university. We were founded about 22 years ago, and in fact celebrating our 10th anniversary here in Washington State. We were founded to support underserved populations. So that's not just folks in the rural communities, it's those urban people as well that are not getting what they need, whether from their state university or community college for one reason or another. And this year's been really an up and down for us, as it has been so many of you. We're really delighted in many ways that we've had higher graduation rates through the spring than we've ever had. And we attribute it to the fact that folks are home and getting their coursework done. So that's a plus. The side is that, people are nervous about what's to come. And it's hard to make a commitment to education, even though maybe this is where you need to go, but to take that first step. So one of the things that I'm really, really interested in and happy to chat about, and definitely not an expert even on behalf of WGU in any way, but our initiatives around supporting diversity, equity, and inclusion. And again, while we were established to serve underserved populations, we of training and helping us understand what that means and how we participate in making changes. We know that diversity in higher education, in our workforce, to life and lifebloods of our communities and industries. Mike McBride made a comment about that as well. We know people of color, young adults, and those with only high school educations, or even sometimes associate's degrees, are disproportionately impacted during periods of economic downturn. And in this time of COVID, we see that inequality accelerated in an unprecedented fashion, especially in areas where it was already high. And we know, again, as the economies recover, again, has been stated, is that job growth will accelerate in occupations requiring the post-secondary credentials. So, but at the same time, the digital divide is disproportionately affecting so many people, specifically people of color, the Black and Hispanic communities across the state and across the nation. So one of the things that we did in August is that WGU has made $1 million available in an online access scholarship. And it's available to anybody who needs broadband internet or devices in order to complete their study or to get started in a program. And this is we are seeing this make a positive impact. But we know the digital divide's very, very large, and it's not going to just be us that make a difference with it. It's a collective, it requires collective action. We're doing some cool things with other organizations to make devices available, to make laptops available, hotspots available, pay for those bills that need to be paid. Not just for the good of WGU, but really for those families and individuals who can take advantage of an opportunity or a time when they're out working and make a difference in their own life. A good example, and one of the people that really helped us get to where we are in this program, is a woman named Katoya. She's here in the Seattle area. She's a single mom, and she had to apply for a student loan just to get a computer. And she earned her bachelor's degree with us in 2018, and she's now successful with her own small business. But she's become a positive voice for social change in this area, well, really across the state. And she's an example of what a small loan, and GSI provides those microloans, could do to lead to great outcomes. Again, this is just a small thing that we're proud to be a part of, but hopefully it leads to large changes in our communities.
Thank you. Thank you. And obviously that's one of the things that we're promoting here, is just getting that broadband access. So thank you for ponying up $1 million for that. So
huge need.
Yes. Catherine, University of Washington. Welcome.
Hello. Well, I think you said you wanted to have us say a little something about ourselves. So Jeannie was just saying she's on the west side. Well, I'm on the east side, even though I represent a west side school, so to speak. But we have our students, as you know, down on the Gonzaga campus and also the Eastern Washington University campus, with our medical school students, our physician assistant students, and our dental students. And we're not going to have a regular campus over here in Spokane. We're just going to focus on those students. So Wazoo and Whitworth and Eastern and everyone else can teach history and math and those sorts of things over here on this side of the state. But let me just say that we've continued strong enrollment at the UW. The pandemic obviously has hit our campus hard in many respects, but those students, either they're in the dorms or they're at home, or they can be in some of the classes. But overall, it's gone pretty well, considering. And what's really hit us is our UW hospitals and our medicine and what's happening with that. And we continue to have clinics treat thousands of COVID-19 patients. We've processed over 1 million tests for the state with COVID right now. Our research into treatments is continuing with the vaccines and COVID-19 vaccine that you might be able to look up. There's an ultra potent vaccine that's being worked on right now on the UW campus or in the research areas. And our population health initiative is funding projects throughout the state to help alleviate some of the impacts of this pandemic. So overall, we're doing very well, trying to support our students and making sure that they're taken care of. Here in Spokane, it's interesting that we have more women than men going to medical school. We have very diverse classes. And so when you asked about inclusion and diversity, the University of Washington, I believe, is one of the most inclusive and diverse colleges and universities around. We have Bothell and Tacoma also. But when you look at what President Kause says constantly, is we need to give everybody that leg up, so to speak. And we have first generation students that come from all over the state and have great Husky Promise scholarships and other things to make sure that those students don't even have to know what a tuition bill is, so to speak. So it's very supportive, very inclusive. You know, Shannon, I've had with College Success Foundation, we've had her bring 200 to 300 students over to our campus, and it's just great what the UW does for the community and for our state. And I just appreciate you letting me chat. Oh, one thing about me, I ran track for the U, but I'm much more heavy than I was then.
What did you run?
I ran sprints, primarily the 400. I hated that race.
The toughest one, they say. Well, and that's great that we have the collaboration with College Success Foundation and University of Washington. Obviously, something we want to build with this group, build those layers of collaboration. Sherry, Eastern Washington University, how are you?
I am good. Bruce, how's everybody this afternoon?
Good.
Good. I'm going to talk just very, very briefly about the role of diversity, equity, and inclusion at Eastern Washington University. As many of you are probably aware, we have gone through a great deal of change and upheaval. But I'm pleased to say that right now we're in a really great place with our interim president, David May. And I think we have a really good leadership team that's putting diversity, equity, and inclusion forward, particularly with me nagging them. We are centering diversity and equity at the heart of any and everything that we do at the university. It is the center. I'm asking my colleagues not to go forward with anything unless you're including diverse perspectives and looking through a multicultural lens at everything that we do. We're starting with our faculty. Our students have had some concerns about the classroom experience. So we're working on things like making sure faculty aren't saying you don't need to pair with the other colored girl in the room, which has been stated, and some other really inappropriate comments. I've started a new program entitled Faculty Diversity Fundamentals. We're bringing in some of the best and the brightest minds to work with our faculty on developing awareness and sensitivity and how to not have microaggressions and implicit bias in the classroom. So we're putting a great deal of focus on that. With the leadership team, I've started diversity briefings. So every single morning that we meet as a leadership team, every Monday, I update them on something that's occurring in terms of diversity. It could be something nationally, it could be something locally, it could be an article, but just information they need to have so that they keep diversity front and center as well. We're also doing a leadership team group read. We're reading So You Want to Talk About Race, and then Keonta Duncan's going to come in and facilitate a leadership team discussion. So I want to keep feeding the faculty and the staff on these issues so it becomes more like breathing for them. I also do cultural connections memos, and those are memos that can be anything going on. If I have a reflection about diversity, I've had reflections about access, I've had reflections about what happened after George Floyd was killed, and I wrote a cultural connections memo that got a huge response from our faculty because it touched them when I wrote about the fact that I was a Black mother of Black sons and what this meant to me to see these brutal murders in front of our faces and what it's like for us as people of color in our community. So those are the areas we're really continuing to work on. I don't believe you can ever do diversity in a silo. It just won't work. We want to be involved in our community. We are very, very involved with the NAACP, Hispanic Business Professional Association, AHANA, the Carl Maxey Center, and the Black Lens. And Gary, we're also members of the Tri-City Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. So we go to those meetings when we're able to meet, and we are very engaged with what's happening there. I've actually keynoted an event for them. So those are just some of the things we're working on. We're trying to do cluster hires now for faculty in some of our colleges. So we're not bringing in one person separately, but groups of people who can come in together, and they have interdisciplinary opportunities. So you can teach across disciplines, which we think is really important. And one last thing I'll say, that in terms of COVID, I thought the university had an excellent response to it. They were one of the first institutions to respond. We got information out to our students, faculty, and staff, and we're offering a hybrid of classes, but primarily we're online. But we're trying to meet everybody's needs and keep up to what the expectations are of us as an institution. And that about does it for me.
Thank you, thank you. And anything maybe from this group, perhaps, in terms of furthering those, furthering collaboration, especially with the business partners, that would help you?
Was that a question for me, Bruce?
Yeah, Sherry. Is it in terms of collaboration? You know, this group has several business partners in it. And I know there's a lot of businesses involved at Eastern Washington University. Just from a bigger picture, can this group, are there things that this group can do to help not just Eastern, but, you know, all our higher education institutions?
I have to think about that.
Okay.
And I'll have to focus on exactly what it is. We have so much going on. I just can't think of it right now. But in terms of partnership, I neglected to mention that we've done some work with Gonzaga. And we're also, I think, one of the few institutions in the area. We bring all the multicultural leaders together. So we meet with them on a regular basis. And we just hosted a virtual campus and community summit for the community and students. So we're one of the few that brings everyone together. And we think that's really important, as we don't do diversity in a silo. But I will keep you all apprised as information is forthcoming. We're working on an exchange program right now with a historically Black college in Kentucky. And I know there will be opportunities for us to interface in the future on some of these initiatives.
Thank you. And I know how busy you are these days. So, okay. Next up, Yoli, Gonzaga University.
Yeah, hi, everybody. My name is Yoli Gallardo, and I'm the Dean of the School of Education here at GU. I've been here for about 16 months or so. Not new to the Dean's position, but new to the Spokane area. So Sherry, we're right there with you at Gonzaga. Yeah, doing a lot of the same kind of stuff. So I'm not going to repeat a lot of it. I'll hit some highlights that maybe are a little bit more specific to GU. But I think a lot of us are really trying to ask some questions around what is this new normal? So COVID has, I think, brought about a bit of exhaustion on the part of students and faculty as we think about new ways of being, but that's also fostered, I think, discussions around what we can do differently and how we can be creative. So I will talk a little bit about collaborations. We have a lot of collaborations going on with the business community in the STEM fields. We have a new, really amazing building going up soon. So the business community has been really involved with that. I would say, from my perspective, and I know a lot of the other administrators on Gonzaga's campus, we would like to be able to see many more opportunities for our students in different ways. And then I want to delve into a second part on that. So to be able to kind of talk about how we're growing the talent that you all may need within the region. And the second part to that I think is pretty important, and I want to focus on this because this is something that I saw. I came most recently from the state of Kentucky, before that Kansas, and I'm from Arizona. But what I have found often within some of these discussions around how to grow talent in different regions, when we think about how we're preparing our students from junior high to high school into college, a lot of times we're talking about how we can track them into certain fields. And I think one of the things that we really do need the business community to be mindful of is how we're paying attention to our marginalized and minoritized populations, to ensure that we're thinking about them when we're thinking about how many physicians we may need eventually in the region, or engineers we're going to need, and not just continuously tracking them into what we used to call kind of voc ed back in the day. So in that vein, at Gonzaga University, what we have been focused on lately is really talking about infusing critical pedagogy into all of our curriculum. And what that means is, and this again, in partnership with our business community, is not just putting certain initiatives into place to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, but to really do the work of understanding the fact that systems of oppression do exist. Otherwise, we wouldn't see the data that we're seeing, right? The disproportionate numbers of minoritized and marginalized populations making up particular categories that that are difficult to talk about, right? As we heard earlier on. But to truly understand how systems of oppression come about, the history behind it, and how that affects the now, so that we can have some real conversations around how universities can partner with businesses to really think about how we're increasing life chances for all of our students and all of our citizens, eventually to make a really strong region. So those are some of the conversations we are having at Gonzaga University, and it is taking some training, to Sherry's point, with the faculty, because not all faculty members are trained, or business community members are trained to think about, gee, you know, what, how did racism come about? You know, what's the history behind it? What does that mean? What is redlining? You know, all of these kinds of concepts of, unless you've had a forum for really unpacking those kinds of things, you don't know what you don't know. So I think if we can have some gracious conversations, we can take the initiatives further so that they don't just stay at basic initiatives. So those are the conversations we're having at Gonzaga University. I'd love to pick the brain of a lot of business partners out there to think about how we can be creative and grow some really amazing things. And one thing about me that not a lot of people know is that I used to be the lead singer of a band. So yeah, used to sing a lot of Aretha Franklin and Johnny Cash and lots of other stuff. So
Wow.
I'll leave it at that.
Where were you at my Thanksgiving dinner when the entertainment didn't show up?
Dang, sorry about that.
Everybody was there and the band didn't show up, and then you weren't there. We could have had fun.
Could have had a throwdown. Yep.
And the entertainment was there. You were there.
Sherry, do you have a question?
I forgot my one thing.
Oh, yes.
I served on a search committee with Stephen King.
Wow.
The Stephen King at the University of Maine, and it was phenomenal.
Wow.
Got a lot of positive attention and great food every time we took the candidate out.
He didn't tell you stories before you went to bed though, right? Yoli, just a question. When you talk about opportunities for students, initially I thought maybe we were talking, you were going to talk about internships or paid apprentice. Is that something in addition?
Oh yeah, the sky's the limit. I mean, we're always looking for those kinds of things. We have, in my school as one example, well, I have several examples within my school alone, let alone all of the nursing and engineering and all of those kinds of fields. But yeah, I mean, sports management, you know, we have great partnerships with the other schools out there, but we prepare people in some other fields as well, counseling, school psych. so yeah, we're always looking for those kinds of things as well. And what I was talking about before, plays a part in that. What kinds of conversations can we have that might be a little bit different and a little deeper than just having our students kind of show up? And then of course that other track is what kind of conversations can we have? What kinds of conversations can we have around, the parallels around preparing them to go into the needed fields? But yeah, internships, that's a given for sure.
Okay, good. Thank you. Thank you very much. Margaret, Washington State University, welcome.
Hi, thank you. So my internet's been a little unstable today, so forgive me if you lose me. So here at WSU, our students have been doing just a great job. They miss the interaction with the other students. So we're a hybrid model also. For the most part, everything is online other than the labs. So they've missed that. They've missed the face-to-face with the faculty, the staff, and especially with other students. That's been really hard for them. I kind of just went through some of these questions and just kind of gave answers, so bear with me. But what do you see as promising opportunities? We have great collaborations with the community stakeholders. Our pharmacy students are engaged with Walgreens, CVS Pharmacy, giving flu vaccines. We're working on the COVID vaccine, hopefully here very shortly. Hopefully that comes out this week, I hope. For DEI, our leadership team just recently read the White Fragility book, and we have had quite a few conversations on that. It was very eye-opening for quite a few of us. We're also in the middle of hiring a senior DEI director. We currently do not have one. So that's, we're all pretty excited about that. And some of the challenges during this time for our students, they're amazing, they're resilient, but they definitely are tired. So I think the Christmas break will be a great opportunity for everybody to recharge their batteries and come back fresh next year. But they definitely are tired. We are working with EWU and their students that are on our campus to keep them safe during this COVID time. So keeping their areas clean and just really working hard with them as they're back on campus. We do have some of our students, research students, are on campus. We have College of Medicine we've got the mobile unit that's out. I don't know if you saw down in Pullman doing some of the testing at Whitman County. It's out in Airway Heights. So we are out and about and looking forward to collaborating any way we can with everybody. So thank you. Oh, the one thing about me. So believe it or not, I lived in Okinawa, Japan for 4 years, and it was awesome. If anybody has a chance to go there, you should.
Wow, thank you. So the senior DEI director, is that local here in Spokane or is that university system wide?
So it would be for our health sciences campus in Spokane.
Okay, great, great. Thank you, thank you. Kimberly, Spokane Falls Community College, welcome.
Thank you. Yes, Spokane Falls Community College, there's a lot of similarities from all the other higher ed professionals who spoke. I will say a couple things. One of them is, as you know, community colleges typically serve a higher percentage of minoritized and marginalized students, whether it's racially, ethnically, or students who are parents, first generation, et cetera. So we do have, in fact, at CCS, we have a more diverse population than the service area that we have. So we attract those students. What we are working on, like every other group has mentioned, is trying to be better at being more inclusive and having more equitable outcomes for our students, as well as for our faculty and staff. COVID has really been a challenge for our students. yes, there's a digital divide, but for our students in particular, the childcare issues and the fact that the K through 12 schools have been at home as well have led to a real decrease in enrollment among our students who are parents, and we have many. It has led to a lot, they just have not been able to enroll in school, even to the point of turning down scholarships. So it's a real serious issue for our students. In terms of something I'd like to kind of, Bruce, you had asked a couple of folks about partnerships and collaboration, and you mentioned internships and things like that. And I don't know if many of you are aware, but for community college students, particularly students from underserved backgrounds, key factors in their completion and transfer to a four-year and actually achieving a baccalaureate degree include internships and research opportunities, undergraduate research opportunities. So that's something that's really high on my list for our students. And in fact, Margaret and I haven't had the chance to carry on that conversation, but before she got here, we had some meetings talking about collaborations between our students and WSU in terms of research opportunities. And that's a huge deal for our students. In terms of our own DEI efforts on campus, we have been really focused on, we did listening sessions with our faculty and staff last spring, exclusively listening to our faculty and staff of color, hearing about their experiences. We did a survey of the campus to see what the priorities for DEI are this year, and those included classroom experience for students, professional development and training, and for some reason I just forgot the third one, which is obviously critical. And we are moving forward on those. We have, for our administrative council, starting in January, we have 5 sessions focused on DEI training for our administrators on campus. So we're really focused on learning and education and transforming our culture as an institution. One of the things that I would throw out there that people probably don't know about me is I make, in my opinion, the best paella outside of Spain.
Well, now I'm hungry.
I make it for 50, so there's plenty.
Oh, okay, okay. I'm coming over at some point. I'll bring some jambalaya. That's what I like to cook. So.
Good, and we'll have Yoli come and sing, and we can have Sherry read scary Stephen King stories.
I love it. Any question? I don't think Gregor is on, is he? I don't see him. Okay. And Cassidy, I kind of didn't quite keep to the schedule. Sorry about that. I think it makes sense to kind of table the small group discussions, but it seems like we really want to get into those a little bit more deeply during maybe our January meeting, where we can focus more on getting into those small groups and identifying some real actionable things that this group can achieve. And maybe we can focus our next meeting on that. Just a thought.
Yeah, no problem, Bruce. Thank you. And I think we all were able to hear some really important both updates and hear from a lot of institutions, of course, too, but then also from Mark and Mike. So I think it was still time well spent. I mean, of course, small groups are always nice to kind of dig deeper into the conversation and high level thoughts. However, seeing we have 10 minutes, if it's okay with you, Bruce, we're not going to go into small groups, but I'd like to just bring one question here for all the group and just unmute or share your thoughts if you have any, because one of our questions was for kind of our small group time is what, in particular to the data that Mike shared, if there was anything that stuck out to you or that was new to you. A lot of it was new, I think, at least more updated and more recent. But then maybe some trends that you're seeing and how that can dovetail into, Bruce, what you were just saying of how we'll continue our January conversation. But I think hearing the data right now, it's maybe top of mind with some thoughts that any of us have. And I just welcome some conversation for 5 or so minutes around that.
Cassidy, I guess one of the questions, Mike, that on that slide that you showed where the number of minorities were represented within unemployment, there's a huge amount of Caucasian people. And I think as we try to get people to understand what the problem is, we need to make sure, when I looked at that, I go, wow, there's a lot of white people unemployed. And I almost would like to see something of how much, what is their representation in the employment or in the labor force, so that we could really see how they were overrepresented in the unemployment. Because it just hit me, and had I not been thinking about it, it would have gone past me, and I'd have said, hey, everything's fine.
Yeah, and that's a good point. And it's actually 88.8% is Caucasian in the employed workforce. So it's obviously a huge amount as comparison.
Any overall question? Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that what I noticed the most about the trend line in terms of employment growth and who was hit the hardest with unemployment is the continuation of a trend we've seen for a long time, which is that the more formal education someone has, the more protected they are from unemployment, and the more likely they are to have higher earnings. So I think that what that tells us is, while when we look at workforce and development, we need to remember that it includes higher education, right? That students, even with some college or associate's degree, do better over lifetime. So it's not about which arm of higher ed. However, that's not a new trend, and it's continuing. So as we think about the collaboration with the high schools, it's really about helping to increase that transition from high school to college, and that completion at college, either a 2-year degree or transferring to a 4-year university.
I did have one question that I'd like to ask. It does seem like in the job postings that we have had over the since March, that we've had really slow response to job postings. I just wondered if that's a trend that everyone has, or maybe it's just the type of jobs that we're posting for, but they're generally professional level positions. Not, of course, we're a nonprofit, so not hugely paid, but fairly paid. And we're not seeing a lot of people coming and asking to be employed, especially when it's a job that has qualifications that are a little bit higher. I just wondered if, Mark, either you or Mike had any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I'll start. And that is something that we're seeing across the board. And there's different factors that are influencing people's desire to re-enter the labor market across the board. And there's, the fear of contracting the virus. There's challenges that they have in balancing childcare if they've got kids back at home, along with delivering educational services in the home, whether their school is in hybrid or full-on distance learning. And then there's, just that people are waiting for their jobs to come back. They're thinking that their job will come back, and therefore they don't need to do anything right now except for wait until the economy picks up again. And we're just, seeing a lot of people that are sitting on the sidelines hoping that their business will be the one that successfully reopens. And so we're actually working to develop that outreach strategy to reach people and to know that, the economy is probably not going to look the same when it comes back. And so now is the time to plug back in, to think about getting that job or entering into a training program that's going to prepare them with the skills needed to be successful in the economy as it comes back online. So yeah, we're seeing it across the board. People are just not, in normal recessionary events, people right away go into training and get skilled up to get ready for it, or they're looking for work because jobs are out there and jobs start coming back. But this is a very different recessionary event.
Yeah, it's we've really noticed a big difference, and we also, I think, have noticed that most of the people that have come in have lesser employment history. So it could just be what you were just talking about, that people that had jobs are waiting for their own jobs to come back. But it's been kind of an interesting dynamic going on during this time that we just haven't seen a lot of applicants.
Cassidy, we have a few minutes left. Did we had a ENT update.
Yeah.
On
Thanks, Bruce.
Yeah.
And thank you all for that conversation, just kind of wrap around. And I think that it will continue, of course, too, as more ideas come to mind or more thoughts. I'd like to ask Jody if you could drop the link in the chat. This is the spreadsheet that we are going to continue kind of brainstorming and putting ideas in from our small group today. That clearly didn't happen, but that's all good. If there's any more thoughts that come to your mind, we just invite you to write those down so you don't lose them before our next meeting in January. And you'll see that there's 4 tabs at the bottom, and that was our small groups that we were divided in last month. And so your name is in a specific tab. So that link will be coming. Thanks, Jody. And then just a couple quick updates from our team's end and our work. And many of you are part of this work. So just want to say first and foremost, thank you. We're really excited to have Sarthak on the team for the next few months at least from Central Valley. And he self-initiated an outreach to our team. So we were just thrilled to hear from him directly and his excitement around learning about not only our work, but GSI as a whole and our entire community. So excited to have him on board, and he'll join the next Alliance meetings as well. Let's see, I think Jeannie mentioned this briefly, but we are, if you haven't heard, hopefully you saw in the newsletter last week, but we're doing the next round of microgrant funding. So that kicked off just about a week ago officially. And we have $25,000 to give in small dollar amounts, so under $1,000 to adults returning to school. And there's some eligibility requirements, of course, but Jody on our team is leading that work. So if you have any additional questions, we're just excited to have some more funds to give out to adults that are wanting to get back into school. And then we, looking ahead in early 2021, we'll have some more additional dollars for that effort as well. So we're really excited about that. Just a brief plug, if you haven't signed up for a newsletter, you can do so. I'll drop the link in the chat as well, because we sent one out last week. Hopefully you received it. And if you didn't, wanted to note and thank so much Tracy and the team at STCU. They have joined, continue really to support all of our efforts as a champion investor of education and talent at GSI. So just want to say thank you to them. And Shannon, I just saw your hand go up. If you want to make a comment there as well, I'll toss it over to you.
Well, I just wanted to make sure, I know Catherine acknowledged earlier the partnership that UW and all of the partners here, all of the higher education institutions have supporting our Achiever Scholars, and then Itron and Innovia, Spokane STEM. But just this past week, Tracy at STCU came and gave us a surprise gift at College Success Foundation. And when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion in the talent pipeline, this is really critical to our work. So the higher ed partners can't get them unless we're sending them and equipping them. And so Tracy, with her wonderful passion and advocacy, secured some amazing funds that are going to help all of our Achiever Scholars and all the students that we represent across Eastern Washington get into Eastern and UW and Gonzaga. And we are just so thrilled. The community colleges of Spokane get a huge number of our students. So I just wanted to say thank you to Tracy and STCU. They are an amazing partner in our region. I know we all know that, but I had to say, Tracy, thank you in front of everyone today, and to all of our higher ed partners. It really is a pleasure working with you and getting our students into your institutions where we know they are succeeding with your great help and support. Thank you.
Thank you, Shannon. If I could just add, we learned about one of the programs you were doing from this forum. So this forum has had some good dialogue that we were unaware of. So in that sharing, Cassidy and your leadership, thank you for connecting us on an opportunity.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that, and I appreciate all of your investments and support all around the screen here in the room. And we will certainly follow up with a few of these highlights in our follow-up email with the recording and all of that information. So keep an eye out for that, as well as if you have any other updates or announcements that you would be sure you'd like this group to know, please send that our way, and we'll make sure that it gets in the email within the next week. So with that, I think it just hit 3:30. So Bruce, if you have anything else to wrap up,
just Shannon and Tracy, thanks for taking us out on a high note. Our next meeting is on January 25th. Ben will moderate that meeting, and I can guarantee he'll do a much better job of keeping us on time, being the rodeo champ that he is, than me. So happy holidays, everybody.
I'll be done in 8 seconds.
Thank you all.
Happy holidays.